if you demand respect instead of developing connection, relationship through the love of Christ, you're missing that key element that we're talking about is humility. Being able to be humbled throughout life gets you to a point where instead of being humble, just be humble and walk with God and see what he's going to do. Trust him in all, in everything that he's doing.
What's up and welcome back to My Boulevard. We are grateful that you are joining us for a brand new season, season 6. And this year we're grounding our conversation in one of the most powerful biblical phrases, for such a time as this. And throughout this season, we'll be looking at and working through the book of Esther, not as a distant story from history, but we want to see it as a mirror for life, leadership, and mission in our city today. Esther is a book about power. It's about vulnerability. It's about courage and fear. And it's about what it means to remain faithful when God places you in spaces you didn't ask for, but we clearly didn't arrive here by accident. And what's striking is that Esther doesn't begin with courage. It actually begins with power. You see, in chapter 1, we're introduced to a king called Xerxes. Yeah, the same king from 300. He's a ruler with unmatched authority, influence, and platform. Yet, he's deeply fragile. His leadership is driven by ego, image, and the need to be affirmed. When his authority is challenged even slightly, his response reveals how dangerous unchecked power can be. Xerxes shows us something we still wrestle with today. When leadership is rooted in self-preservation instead of humility, people get hurt, institutions are fractured, and fear becomes the new operation system. You see, that tension between power and faithfulness, between platform and character is where our conversation begins today. And to help us unpack, we're joined by someone who lives and leads in those tensions every day. We're here to talk to my main man, Boulevard Missionary Thomas Cotton. And so, Thomas, what's up? And secondly, when you look at Xerxes' leadership in Esther 1, what stands out to you and what warnings can we talk about specifically on a street level?
Well, thanks, Dahadi. Welcome. Glad to be here. Good to see Missy. Good to see Dahadi. As Dahadi said, my name's Thomas. I am a missionary, Boulevard Missionary. My work centers around gang redevelopment in Las Vegas. And what that is basically, for years, I grew up in, different neighborhoods and been able to see a lot of people go through challenges with gangs and so many other things. And when we start thinking about gangs, a lot of times people, the way they approach gangs and gangbangers and everything else is to dismantle them, to disrupt them, to lock them up. It's a challenge because, we see the harm that's being done to the community, but do we see the person that's behind all that they still need a savior? And so gang redevelopment is all about redeveloping gangs to be the transformation that we can see. So I like to say that, I build relationships that help build systems that help people so we can share the gospel. And when I look at gangs is just another system that needs Jesus. And a lot of times, us as missionaries, us as the church, we need to be able to step into those spaces and be able to see that there's a person that still needs that peace that Jesus offers. And so that's the work I do, a little bit about it. It's a whole lot more, but we ain't got time for all that. But to answer your second question, when I think about what stands out about King Xerxes' leadership and warning signs, there's a few things that really stand out. When we think about anger, pride, or validation, man, he was full of all that. He was powerful, but he still needed that validation. So he wasn't just somebody who can just rest in his power. He was reactive. Anything that challenges his little fragile ego, he had to challenge back. the interesting thing is he could rule an empire, but couldn't rule his own ego. So,
Wow.
when we start talking about public power with that has private insecurity, that's a dangerous combination, because a lot of times we have to recognize where the calling is when it comes to the power we have, and understand that, like, the insecurities we have, we need to still be able to trust in something that's greater than us when we have this amount of power, because eventually, we start looking down on people. And that's the hope that, when we start talking through this, that we start to recognize we can't look down on people just because we have a little power, because we got a little status.
First of all, I knew you were the exact right person to have this conversation with. I'm so glad you're here. We're glad to have you. So I heard you
Thank
say something profound. He can rule a whole empire, but not control his own ego. When you think of just that much power and that little self-control, how does that mirror leadership and platform in ministry in your context?
Yeah, when I think about, that power and that control and how it mirrors, in our context, a lot of leadership needs validation. So it demands
Mm,
spectators. It demands people to be able to see
wow.
me. You got to see me as a leader, not necessarily that I actually lead well, but if you see me as a leader or someone you can follow, then you start to have these people who are spectating, who are hyping you up, and so many other things. So when we think about Xerxes, he displayed his wealth, and it wasn't to solve a problem. It wasn't to build people. It was just to be seen. And so in my context, when you start thinking about it, jewelry replaces stability. The cars replace, like, my character, and then image replaces identity. We don't really have a true identity around who we are. And I don't think King Xerxes had that same type of identity. He didn't have a true identity. He was king, but didn't walk in that calling or who he was. And so when we
Mm,
start thinking about our context, it always needs a validation behind it. And that's what he needed. He needed this validation to be seen, to be known, and that I can strike fear because I can make decisions that can harm you. But there was nothing about true respect, true understanding, developing relationships. So, yeah, when we think about Xerxes, he had this massive platform, but little self-control.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of reminds me. I mean, I think about the old movie when Ice Cube was playing. He was just like, man, people always looking for respect. Penitentiary full of that's looking for
right.
respect. And I think that that's oftentimes, so whether it's on gang culture, whether it's in the White House to just the everyday house, I mean, it's just one of those things that we all wrestle with. We desire, we want respect, and
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes,
Right.
and because again, for a big part of us is that we all have a desire to belong and matter and be purposeful and have
Mm-hmm.
significance. We see that whether it's in the NBA, sports teams, a variety of different things that we have, and we see that happen with Xerxes as well, in the book. And so this is really why we want to talk about today is just this idea of like when leadership without ego or, humility versus kind of this platform culture. And you see, like, just because you get the platform doesn't mean you're good, you're satisfied, because you got Xerxes who has the biggest platform anybody can possibly have, but he still needed people to stroke his ego. Right. And, and Missy, I just think about that as it relates to, like every day, like because we feel like the bigger our platform, the more impact that we can have, and then we have the fear of getting canceled once we get the that impact and all of those things. Like, how do you kind of wrestle with the fear, like this fear of getting canceled, and just even humility, and how that plays with leadership?
Well, I think Thomas said something really, really important, and I would love for you to even expound on that. Thomas said that leadership for a lot of people equals validation, right? It's
Mhm.
not the service, it's not the influence, it's not the impact, it's the validation. So when your leadership is about being validated, then of course, canceling is the loss of validation, right? Being canceled is the loss of validation. So then I have to live in that fear. I have to be afraid that I'm going to be canceled. I don't know. How do you navigate that fear, Thomas?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we think about validation, leadership does need validation. And I think the validation comes through accountability.
Right,
Being able
correct.
to have people that hold you accountable, that can verify that, you're legit in your leadership. But I still believe that even though people can validate your leadership and they can see that you lead well, there's still this other side of leadership that I've noticed, especially as a church planner, as a missionary, and so many other things. It's this thing of calling. When you're
Mm,
called to something, you're not really worried about budgets. You're not worried about anything. It's, here I am, send me. And so, a missionary should be on mission. And the mission should always focus around what God is doing, because if God called you to it, he'll call you through it. So the fear of being canceled is not even there, because I understand what's going on today is not necessarily what's going to happen tomorrow. And if we're walking by faith, not by sight, yeah, what we see today is a cancel culture. We see a lot of things getting canceled. And, for me, if what I'm doing right now was canceled, I would still do whatever God called me to do.
mm,
There would be something where he's leading me to. So when I think about what I'm doing, what's called the new G movement, and so, there's a G mentality, and I wrote the book, The New G Mentality. So there's this new G mentality. It doesn't move for applause. I'm not looking for applause. I'm not even looking to build my own platform. I can't do this work by myself. So it takes time to build with others that can hold accountable, hold this movement accountable, hold me accountable. It builds quietly also, because when we think about being canceled, the louder you are, the more people want to cancel you.
mm.
And so sometimes you got to move quietly and think long term and lead with restraint. You can't just go out here and putting down people who've been doing this work forever and think that, oh, I got something new, and since I got something new, I'm much better than you. No, people have been putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this work. I just have something that's different that can come together, and we can merge well together, and make a significant impact. I have a different system of looking at how we engage gangs and gang intervention, and how we also share the gospel with people who may be standoffish about the gospel. I found that developing relationships is really a key to being able to share whatever I want with people, no matter what background you have. People are people. So if you know me and you feel comfortable with me, and as I'm sharing with you ways to help your life, if I want to share Jesus with you, there's a trust level right there where you'll hear what I have to say and I can share my story. And so, as I mentioned before, developing relationships to develop systems to help people so we can share the gospel. It's important that we have that platform in that way, because if we have a fear of being canceled, then we shouldn't do this work, because there are
Yeah.
so many things in opposition. Number one, the gangs themselves. Like, I'm looking at disrupting a whole economy, a hood economy, but I have to replace that hood economy with something else too. So there's going to be pushback, because, a lot of times this is the way people make their money. And sometimes they make it off the back of the people that we're trying to help out. And so if I'm taking the people who are making money from you, that can be a problem also. Also
That's a
with,
different kind of
law
fear,
enforcement.
right?
Yeah, law enforcement can jump in. So many other areas can jump in, because if we're changing people, they're changing communities, then this, prison pipeline that we see may start to dry up. So I'm starting to look at,
Mm,
other
yes.
people's jobs. No one
Yes.
really wants this to be successful. So as we're starting to walk into this space, there can't be a fear of being canceled, because cancellation can happen, but that's only if God says it.
I think that what you did too was change the narrative in that conversation from afraid of being canceled, like on social media, and afraid of being canceled out in the culture, and dealing with what it means to be afraid in my own community, being canceled in my own space, because that's what you're talking about. It's one thing for they're screaming at me on the internet, but I don't got to be around them. I don't got to talk to them. But in this community, if I get canceled, then the work that I'm doing can be at jeopardy. And I think that's a different kind of fear.
Yeah, and I do feel like it's a different type of fear, but and I love your heart, Thomas, Because here's the thing, I wish everybody can embrace that type of heart.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, when we teach a Boulevard cohort, one of the phrases that I oftentimes say is that we got to be willing to be unsuccessful in this life so we could be successful in the life to come.
Mhm.
And I think that mindset is because Jesus changed that mentality. He says the greatest is the least and the least is the greatest. And
Mhm.
but oftentimes that's not the mindset that we have. I remember kind of first starting, ministry. I remember talking to Deuce. Actually, I was in Philly and I was talking to Deuce, and I remember saying, man, like he was like, "You ready to plant this church?" And I was just like, "Man, yes, I'm excited." But like what I loved about being in Denton, Texas, is that I was relatively unknown. No one really knew me. I was just
Mhm.
able to make disciples, make an impact. Because for me, I don't care about making I don't care about having the biggest name.
Mhm.
I just want to have the greatest impact that I can possibly have, because part of this is growing up as a son of a pro athlete, growing up with my aunts who did clothes for like, celebrities. And I saw all of that. And I was like, I don't need that. I don't need the celebrityism. I don't need any of those things. But I was just like, but here's the wrestle. And I was telling Deuce, I was like, here's the wrestle that I have. The wrestle I have is that people don't think you have anything to say unless you're invited to the big stage, unless you're invited to the conferences and all those things. And it was just like,
Mhm.
and I was like, I don't really want that. And I had this love-hate relationship ever since then with conferences, like going and speaking at conferences, but at the same time knowing I want to make an impact where I live, where I work, in my worship. And so this is when we talk about with my Boulevard, that's it. This is like, because our underlying belief is that if we make an impact locally, then we collectively can make an impact globally. And I think that is critical for us. And so I guess the tension that I have is that I feel the same way, because we're talking about this cancel culture in the same way. It feels like I have to get more followers, more Instagram, more those things. It may not be conferences anymore, but now it's like the more followers I have, the more I can do that. But there's a sacrifice that you got to make in order to gain that type of power. I think oftentimes between I got to say what I think people want me to say, or I got to be very controversial and all of those things. And it's another way of trying to grasp power, but trying to, in the same way, grasp power by discrediting someone or tearing somebody down by getting somebody else's validation.
Well, I
Mhm.
also, well, yes, no, I'm sorry. There's no while I also.
Mhm.
You're 100% right. And I'm listening, I'm thinking about how important the role of humility is in leadership when you are thinking about platforms and influence, and how much accountability is a part of that. So, what does leadership look like? And this is for both of y'all. What does leadership look like when influence is growing, but accountability feels optional? We all know what that looks like.
When I think about that question, it reminds me that we all mess up sometimes in this area.
Hmm.
Humility says, I blew it. Get back to the basics, and I
Hmm.
used to invest in real estate and I was making money. I used to be like, man, this is legal drug money. And it was crazy how much money you can make. But then my mindset was, God, if you let me make this much money, then I'll be able to retire and then I'll serve you well. And
Mm.
when the market crashed, I almost lost everything. And one day I was driving down the street and I was just praying, like, God, why am I going through this? And I was going down a hill, and in my spirit, it was just like, look up, there's your mission field.
Mm.
And it just dawned on me at that point where, you know, I had everything backwards. And the humility part of leadership is I had everything backwards, owning that mess and repenting from that and realizing that I should put service and God's work before anything else. And so, institutions that fear accountability are going to fall. I mean,
Mm.
it's true with the Xerxes and, what we're reading in Esther 1. And then when we see, for what I do, urban leadership demands accountability. There is no, if I'm going to say I'm going to lead you and I'm not showing up, then there's no accountability there. No one's really going to follow in this context.
Mm.
And
That's good.
so I can use my lived experience as a way to develop a relationship and connect through being transparent. But when we start thinking about humility, being transparent is a humble thing.
Mm.
I need to share with you who I am, that I do have flaws and all. I'm not this perfect. And perfect person or a perfect Christian or anything like that. I am redeemed though. And I'm not, just because I wasn't perfect before, it doesn't mean I can't do better now. And so when I think about leadership, respect is developed, not demanded. And so when a leader is demanding respect, to me, that's the first sign of, being cautious, because if you demand respect instead of developing connection, relationship through the love of Christ, you're missing that key element that we're talking about, is humility. And I feel like, being able to be humbled throughout life gets you to a point where instead of being humble, just be humble and walk with God and see what he's going to do. Trust him in all, in everything that he's doing.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think spot on, because for me, I think when I think about humility, a synonym of humility is sobriety. And it's sort of like this idea that we embrace what I see in Matthew chapter 5 in the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are those who know how to grieve. Blessed are those who embrace their humanity. It's sort of like this idea of just like, hey, when we're humans, like, it's like, hey, we recognize I'm human. And then this God is like talking to us, hey, this is great. You be human and let me be God, right? Because we're terrible at trying to be God, and let us just be human. And I think when we understand that we're human and we're not superhuman, we're not superheroes, but we're just human, I think the reality is that we recognize that this story is not about us. It's about the Lord. It's about God. And I think true humility recognizes that I have some gifts and I have some things to bring to the table, right? But I also know that I'm not fully complete, right? And I think that is the ability to be able to bring that, I think, is really important for us to understand, is that, man, because like I'm beautiful and I'm wonderfully made, but I'm also broken, right? In need of a savior, in need of you. And I think that is the beauty of what true humility is, and being able to do, because when you don't have that type of humility, all you do is want to surround yourself with people who are like telling you how good you are. And that's what we saw with Xerxes, right? It's just like, tell me how good I am. You guys see how I just, tweeted out that IG, or how, I just said that I told those people off, and and we just do, you see that? And you just kind of want validation from whatever your incubator is, your echo chamber. But then on the flip side, we're just kind of like, we're tearing down humans that are made in the Imago Dei. And that's what we saw with King Xerxes, with Queen Vashti, right? Just like he's just trying to humiliate other people for the purpose of his own ego. And I see that's what we're doing right now. I don't care how valid and all, like, what happened to the idea of, especially because, we're talking about Christians to other Christians. We're talking about there's no holds bar to this. And I'm just kind of like, man, like, what happens to just like not talking about the Lord's anointed? What happened with treating people as image bearers? It's sort of like right now we get to a point where we feel validated, and I'm validated to tear you off. I'm validated to strike the rock. I'm validated. And so I just think that is critical when it talks about this idea that we're all human. We all have stories, and we all need one another as we are trying to pursue what God has called us to be and do.
And, if you trace the line of a lot of leaders in the Bible, you see that God had taken them on a journey to instill humility in them. And some got it and some did not, to a greater and lesser degree. But you can see the outcome of that journey through their leadership. Did I grasp that God was trying to teach me leadership, or did I miss it? Yeah.
Think about what we're talking about here. We're in a social media age where, people will kind of do whatever they need to do so they get likes, they get validation, they get following. And it's absolutely needed to have that, like the visible platforms and everything, especially if you want to be successful in the ministries that you're doing, because, it takes support. It's not, we're building support for myself and my family. We're building support so we can make the impacts that we need to make within our communities, that people can know the gospel. And so, when we think about platforms, they make you visible, but only, character makes you trustworthy. And so a lot of times we can't just have a visible platform without character that can help us be trustworthy. And I think that takes the humility, no matter how much your platform grows.
Well, we have to wrap up because of time. I can't believe this conversation has flown by, but I do have one more question. And of course, this is for both of y'all. If Esther 1 is kind of like a case story, this is not like a Bible study, but just a backdrop. If Esther 1 is a case study in leadership gone wrong, what are some markers of healthy, faithful leadership we should be cultivating instead?
Well, I'll just start it off and just kick it in to say, I'm just going to give us one thing, right? Well, two things that I'm going to say. Number one is, if God calls you to be a farmer, don't stoop so low to be a king, right? And I think sometimes we don't have the character to take on some of the platforms that we have. And that leads me to my second principle. The second principle about just healthy leadership in this time of platforms and all of that is what Dr. Crawford Loritz used to always tell us. He says, don't let your giftings take you to your place where your character can't keep you. And I think that is important, and as we think about our platforms, as we think about all of the things that we got to understand that our character matters more than the platforms that we can gather, right? We can gain. And I think that that's important. And so I'm grateful for serving alongside humble leaders like yourself, like the both of you, and just really, that's really what it's about, because, it's about practitioners making an impact where we live, where we work, and where we worship.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback off of some of this, what Heidi just said. When your power grows faster than your character, it's hard for you to show restraint. It feels like you have to announce your strength instead of demonstrate it by restraint. And so a lot of times when we think about the character of the king, he had to announce his strength. He had to show it. He had to demonstrate it. But we talked about humility, but I also believe that when we think about identity and versus image, the king functioned by image. His image was one way, not his identity. He didn't have his identity rooted and grounded in some place. So his leadership collapsed the moment his identity was challenged. And so when you challenge his identity, or his image was challenged, he had no other identity to fall upon. So a lot of times when we start thinking about what goes wrong within leadership, faithful leadership should be cultivated in restraint. It should be cultivated in character. It should be cultivated in a true identity.
That is so good. Y'all gave us several mic drops. I wanted to drop a mic with you. I want to drop a mic with you. This is such good conversation. Thomas, I am so grateful. We are so grateful for you joining us. I really wish we had more time to talk. We may have to get him back, because there's so much in his work that he does that I think is so appropriate and so necessary for people to hear. So we will also try to promote your book in our show notes. So I'll figure out how that happens. That's above my pay grade, but we'll make sure your book is gets out there. And we're just really grateful for you. We're grateful for the work that you do in your boulevard. So thank you for joining us, Thomas.
Thank you for having me.
So we're really excited. Thank you for joining the first episode of season 6, where we're saying this is my boulevard for this year, for this season. We're focusing on the idea of, for such a time as this, as we walk thematically through the book of Esther, looking at, how can we make courageous choices in some controversial times, right? In a time where it feels like God is absent and all the things that's going on. So we're really excited to be walking with you through this season. Join us. Make sure you click subscribe, like, all the things, so that we can get the word out. We love you, appreciate you. And remember, this is my boulevard. Peace.